My name is Caroline Jacob, and we're continuing a series of videos about writing songs from our songwriting workshop, which was held in the fall of 2019. Music uses a series of pitches to create a melody, and if you're creating a song, you need to consider the text and the language that it's written in, and if the languages have different speech patterns. So we are going to mention other speech patterns, but today we're basically going to talk about English eventually. We know with background on songs that the ancient Greeks used music in their theaters. We know the play had just a few actors that played several roles and a chorus. And that chorus of people, that was their job to make comments on the action that was taking place on the stage. So they helped the audience understand what was going on. So the chorus supposedly was the speaking part, and yes, there is an evidence though that they were also singing and that they danced. So the chorus had to work in unison. That means as one voice, because evidently the theaters were really large. The music is most likely monophonic. That means it only has just a melody or one line. All are singing the same part. Perhaps the men an octave lower than the women, but it's the same. But they're all singing the same kind of tune. There is no use of instruments that was specified, but I'm sure they were used to help out these productions. So skipping forward, we encounter texts that we know were sung, and of course those are the Psalms. Over hundreds of years they were translated and sung in various languages and dialects. We have ideas about some of the types that might have been used. There are many translations of the Bible, historically speaking. The early Latin Bible, the Vulgate, dates from the 4th century, and that was before the breaks in the Christian church. We know the early church used some forms of what we call chant. Now there are different kinds of musical styles from different parts of Europe. We know that many of the forms of chant existed in local regions. Our most famous one is Gregorian, named after Pope Gregory. But there's also Ambrosian chant, Gallican chant, Sarum chant, Mozarabic chant, and more. And a lot of them have differences because of the language they were using. With the division of the church in about the year 1250, more or less, new ideas about worship arose, but they were still considering the use of the Psalms. So today, many churches use the Psalms and often have simple tunes so the average person can sing. Now one example would be a refrain, but then a verse. And here's a verse, for example, of "The Lord is my shepherd." "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in good pastures. He leads me beside still waters." So that's pretty simple, and the movement of that is pretty close stepwise and has a little bit of a shape to it. But you sing as many words as you want on a reciting tone or a reciting note, so that way I can say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." I just sang whatever I needed, and so all the Psalms fit. But there have been other ideas. So in the Western world, there were those who thought everyone should sing the Psalms in their own language. And this brought about the new translation somewhere around 1500. And with it, new music, because it was a different language. Music was published for singing all the Psalms. That was in Geneva. There was about a dozen tunes, and the Psalms could just be sung to those tunes because the words were now in meter. This is something different. One of the most well-known tunes from that era is called the Old Hundredth, because it was the tune that was used or associated with the 100th Psalm in an Anglican hymn book of a later date. So most of English-speaking people know that tune, "To all people that on earth do dwell," or as the doxology we sang, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow." And I'll just play it for you briefly. So that is one that we've all known, and it comes with varying rhythms. Sometimes there's a long first note, sometimes there's a more of a triple rhythm, but that's basically the notes of the tune. Now Bach actually used that, she changed the rhythm too, and he used it in his Cantata 130. So I'll just play it for you so you can see what Bach did to it, okay? And it's in a different key. Probably recognize that tune, and you saw that Bach fancied it up. So if we look at the meter of this particular tune that we just did, we discover the metrical foot. We discover that it's 8, 8, 8, 8, or it's also called long meter, or LM, and that means each line has 8 syllables. So if we count on our fingers, all people that on earth do dwell, sing to the Lord with cheerful voice. You can see what I'm talking about. And so that's why we have this kind of pattern. Now if you look in hymn books, you will often find metrical indexes. And these meters are based on this poetic foot that dates back to the Greeks. And the poetic foot really sort of refers to dancing, in that you have to lift your foot up before you can put it back down to touch the ground. So therefore, the foot was probably associated with dancing and somehow got into what you sang along with the dance. And maybe they sang for the dances. In English, we have a rhythm that's in our speaking pattern that's called iambic pentameter. So the iambic pattern is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So it's short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. If you do the short, long pattern 5 times, that's the penta. So it's iambic, which is the short, long, but they do it 5 times. So it's pentameter, so it's 5. Shakespeare's "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Just that one line is in iambic pentameter. And iambic pentameter is kind of long. Most of English poetry, though, uses shorter hymns. Hymns use shorter metrics. So, for example, we'll find another one that's called 8-6-8-6. And if we check out a hymnal, we will find a metrical index of hymn tunes right here. This particular one is called common meter, because there are lots of sets of patterns of words that fit in any number of tunes. This book has about 10 tunes that go under common meter. So one of the most famous songs for the common meter is "O God, Our Help in Ages Past." But another famous song that uses the same meter is "Amazing Grace." Now we don't usually think about the two of them being together, but I'm going to play "O God, Our Help in Ages Past," and maybe you should try singing "Amazing Grace" to that tune, because it actually does work. So we get "Amazing Grace, sweet how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." So you can see how that fits. So hymns generally have 3 or 4 stanzas, maybe 5, so it's a poem. And if the poem has the right number of syllables per line, depending on what you want, then you can interchange the melody, another melody for a set of words that you have. If you wanted to sing "Amazing Grace" to "O God, Our Help in Ages Past," you could do this. You could do a lot of other ones. So your foot length of the verses have to be correct, though, because it won't line up right. Now let's look at some folk music for just a minute, or folk songs. Many folk songs have a metrical pattern to them also. We could figure that for anything. But they also have a musical pattern, and one that actually uses repetition in the melody. So an example of that is the song All Through the Night, the Welsh folk song. And it generally, you know it probably, it has 4 phrases. So the first phrase, the second phrase, and the fourth phrase, as far as musical feet and pitches, are exactly the same. The third phrase is the one that's different. So this example of folk music is true in Scottish, Welsh, English folk music. Not all of them, but very much of the parts. So let me play you a little bit of All Through the Night. Okay? Now, just to give you an example of someone making use of a tune that they probably already knew, the 20th century hymn writer Fred Pratt Green, who was an Englishman, wrote new words to this folk song, and they're for the fruit of all creation, thanks be to God. For the gift to every nation, thanks be to God. For the plowing, sowing, reaping, silent growth while we are sleeping, future needs and earth's safe keeping, thanks be to God. And he wrote it to the tune that we just did. So you can hear that going through there. So that was just one use of that. That same set of words has been written, new tunes have been written for it besides the one that I think he had in mind, which was probably this one, for the fruits of all creation. But there are other tunes for that available in other hymn books, same nice words. So we've seen there can be 20th century words. You can write a set of words that go with a tune you already know, which would be kind of interesting to do too if it's something you really like. But now you're going to write a song. You want to write a melody to a text that you have. Well, what kind of a text is it? Is it a military one? Is it telling a story? Is it very emotional? Is it about, what's it about? And what perspective do you want? What's the point of view? Is it a girl singing about her love that's gone off to the army? Or is it about something else that you want to do? Is it happy because you're thinking about something that's big in your life? I don't have any idea, but we're just saying you got to stop and figure it out a little bit, at least some of it, so you get an idea of what you're doing. So this will help you start to figure out what kind of melody you would want, because you don't want a sad melody if it's a happy occasion. And maybe you don't want it too sad so that people cry. Let's start out by reading the text, preferably out loud. And if you read it to someone, or if not, pretend you're reading it to someone, and do it like a dramatic reading. Have a little emotion, a little feeling, a little way of interpreting the words. And that'll give you a feel for the words and the flow of the words. Because just reading it by yourself quietly is not going to project what you want with the song. The song is normally sung to somebody, or you hope it's going to be sung to somebody. So if you've written the words yourself, you might find some new ideas as you're reading through this particular song or this lyrics. And I would say keep your old words and jot down your new ones, because maybe you are going to change your thing, but maybe you're not going to change it. Maybe eventually you'll figure out that you really like the original. So I'm going to read you part of a famous poem just to give you an idea of what I would do if I were using this poem. And this is an historic poem written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and it's called Paul Revere's Ride. And so it was written in the 19th century. Revere wrote in the road in the 18th century, but here we go. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in '75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church tower as a signal light. One if by land, two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm. So Middlesex is the area where this takes place. Of course, we know it's present-day Boston, but there we are. So they're going to be up and to arm. Now how did you feel about that? To me, it has more verses, about 10 more, but it's kind of a gallop. It has this flow, and that goes along with the text, which is maybe the way I read it. But if you write a melody, it's going to probably imitate maybe a horse galloping or a three of da 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 da. So to me, the rhythm of this is probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Da 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 da. It's two groups of 3 or 6/8 time, and that's called compound meter because we're taking the pattern of 3 and putting it with another pattern of 3. So you need to decide though, what possible direction of this melody. Do you want it to go up when you start? Do you want it to go down? Do you want it to move stepwise? Do you want it to have jumps? What words should you emphasize, if any? So I'd like to try, I could start a melody like this with listen, my children, and you shall hear. That's just going up. Or I could do, listen, my children, and you shall hear. If I wanted to, that's just going down. So that's just an idea of how do I start it. But I'm going to put these words over here so I can read them, and we're going to try just making up a song about the first 2 stanzas, and maybe other stanzas will fit to the same thing you write, but I like to start on the same note as if I'm telling the story. So, listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in '75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march on the land and sea from the town to hang a lantern in the belfry arch of the North Church tower as a signal light, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm. So I left it kind of hanging at the end. Earlier I sang through it myself, and I didn't leave it hang. I went down. So for the country folk to be up and to arm again, and go back down to the low note. So I pretty much kept it in the range of 5 notes, and then I did have the one high note, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be. I went up and I was kind of word painting that was saying it was moving. It was in a different place. It wasn't with everybody. So if you can't write the music down, I think you should record it for some future reference, because you might really like what you wrote. Today you may have one idea, and maybe by tomorrow some other song will pop into your head, or a tune, because this is a creative process and it needs to evolve. So don't think that what's good today is going to be bad tomorrow, or vice versa. The better the text, though, the better the text, the better it is to create a melody with. So you might try to write a text, if you're not used to writing text but you're getting in the groove there, you might try to write a text to a tune you already know, like a folk song or a hymn tune. And that approaches it from a different direction. We don't have the words, we're going to make the words. But make sure the tune that you use is public domain and not copyrighted, which is why using most hymn tunes or folk songs are available to everybody, and there's no problem with doing that. So what are possible rhythms for your text? Well, there may have a feeling of 2 or 4, something that's more march-like. Or we might have something like a waltz, which is in 3, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Or we might have a compound meter, like we did here, and a compound means that it's 2 groups of 3 broken up, so we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is just a start to creating a melody from words. You might want to review another one of our videos, like the Creating Melodies one. You might want to listen to tunes from earlier times to get inspired, see what other people did. And we hope that this shows you some avenues toward songwriting. Everyone's a little bit different in how they approach this process, but anything that works for you is the right way.